Just now, Trump demands Carney resign. Canada's response left Washington speechless at 9:23 this morning Eastern Time. Inside a closed-door meeting at the White House, something happened that has never occurred in the 78-year history of post-war transatlantic diplomacy. Donald Trump, in a phone call that lasted exactly 14 minutes and 31 seconds, according to three sources briefed on the conversation, directly demanded that Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney resign from office. Not suggested, not hinted, demanded. And what happened next in Ottawa represents the most consequential moment in NATO-Canada relations since the War of 1812. I need you to understand the weight of what I am about to tell you, because what transpired in the 6 hours that followed that phone call isn't just a diplomatic story. This is a stress test on whether democratic allies can maintain sovereignty when the world's most powerful nation decides that foreign elections, foreign governments, and foreign leaders are subject to American veto. If you care about what happens to the international order over the next 72 hours, you need to subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications, because the events unfolding at this very moment will determine whether American power still operates within any recognizable boundaries, or whether we have entered an era where the President of the United States believes he can hire and fire the leaders of sovereign nations. Here's what we know. 3 independent sources, 2 from the National Security Council staff, and 1 from a senior aide to the Secretary of State, have confirmed to us the exact sequence of events that unfolded this morning. The call was initiated by Trump at 9:07 a.m. from the Oval Office. It was not scheduled. It was not on any official call sheet. According to the official readout that was transmitted to my source less than 4 hours ago, Trump opened the conversation by stating that Prime Minister Carney's economic policies, specifically his refusal to lower Canadian interest rates in coordination with anticipated Federal Reserve moves, represented, quote, a direct threat to American economic security. The conversation, according to all 3 sources, became heated within the first 3 minutes. Trump told Carney, and I am quoting directly from the notes taken by a staffer who was present in the Situation Room monitoring the call, that if Carney did not resign within 48 hours and allow a, quote, more cooperative leadership to take over in Ottawa, that the United States would impose what Trump called, and this is a direct quote, economic measures that would make Canada rethink its entire relationship with the United States. Now let me show you exactly what happened next, and why every single foreign policy expert I have spoken to in the last 6 hours is using words like unprecedented, catastrophic, and constitutional crisis. According to flight tracking data, which is publicly available through websites like Flight Radar 24, a Canadian government aircraft departed from Ottawa MacDonald Cartier International Airport at 11:42 a.m. Eastern Time, exactly 2 hours and 35 minutes after Trump's call ended. That aircraft landed at Joint Base Andrews outside Washington at 12:58 p.m. On board that aircraft was Canada's foreign minister, who proceeded directly to the State Department for what sources describe as the most tense diplomatic meeting between American and Canadian officials in modern history. What I'm about to tell you is not speculation. This is reconstruction based on direct knowledge from people who were briefed immediately after that meeting ended. Let me walk you through exactly how we got here, because the timeline matters enormously. This did not happen overnight. This was a cascade of decisions, miscalculations, and strategic provocations, and every single step was documented. Tuesday, February 18th, Mark Carney, who assumed office as Canada's Prime Minister just 47 days ago after winning a decisive electoral victory, announced a comprehensive economic policy framework in a televised address to the Canadian Parliament. The centerpiece of that framework was a commitment to maintaining higher interest rates than the United States Federal Reserve in order to combat what Carney described as inflationary pressures unique to the Canadian economy, specifically housing cost inflation in Toronto and Vancouver that has reached crisis levels. Carney, a former governor of the Bank of England and one of the most respected central bankers in the world, stated explicitly that Canada's monetary policy would be set independently based on Canadian economic conditions, not in coordination with American Federal Reserve decisions. Thursday, February 20th, 2 days after Carney's announcement, Trump held a cabinet meeting in the Roosevelt Room, where, according to 2 sources familiar with the discussion, He described Carney's policy as, quote, a betrayal of the integrated North American economy. Trump directed his economic advisers to prepare what he called leverage options for bringing Canada into compliance with American economic policy preferences. One source described Trump's language as shockingly blunt, stating that the president said, and I quote, "We own their economy, and they need to remember that." Saturday, February 22nd, Trump posted on Truth Social at 6:47 a message that many observers dismissed as typical morning grievance, but which, in retrospect, represented the opening salvo of what would become a full diplomatic assault. The post read, "Mark Carney is destroying the Canadian economy with radical high interest rates that are killing hard-working Canadians. Many people are saying he should resign and let someone who understands economics take over. The United States will not stand by while our biggest trading partner commits economic suicide." The post received 847,000 likes within 6 hours and was shared by multiple conservative media figures who began describing Carney as anti-American. Monday, February 24th, the insult heard around the world. At a White House event celebrating American manufacturing, Trump, speaking without prepared remarks, looked directly at the camera and said, "Mark Carney, if you're watching, you're fired, except you can't fire him because he works for Canada. But if I could fire him, I would. He's a disaster. Terrible for Canada. Terrible for the United States. Terrible for North America. The Canadian people deserve better." The statement was carried live on every major news network. Within 2 hours, the Canadian Embassy in Washington issued a terse statement reminding the White House that Canada is a sovereign nation and that its Prime Minister is elected by Canadian voters, not appointed by foreign powers. That was 4 days ago. Now here's where it gets dangerous. According to multiple sources, and I'm talking about people who have relationships with both American diplomatic personnel and Canadian government officials, Trump interpreted Canada's response not as a justification of democratic sovereignty, but as defiance requiring escalation. Between Monday evening and Wednesday morning, Trump held at least 3 separate discussions with his trade advisor about potential tariff measures targeting Canadian exports. One source described these conversations as Trump asking repeatedly, "What hurts them the most, and how fast can we do it?" Which brings us to this morning at 9:07, when Trump picked up the phone and decided that suggesting Carney's resignation was insufficient. He demanded it. Now let me tell you who Mark Carney actually is, because this is not some random politician looking for attention. This is arguably the most credentialed economist to serve as head of government anywhere in the G7 in the last 30 years. Carney served as governor of the Bank of Canada from 2008 to 2013, navigating Canada through the global financial crisis with policies that resulted in Canada being the only G7 nation to maintain its AAA credit rating throughout the crisis. He then served as governor of the Bank of England from 2013 to 2020, where he managed Brexit economic uncertainty and earned widespread praise from both Conservative and Labour Party leaders for his independence and competence. Carney holds degrees from Harvard, Oxford, and has published extensively on financial stability and central banking. When he entered Canadian politics and won the Liberal Party leadership in December, it was viewed internationally as Canada securing one of the world's premier economic minds to navigate an increasingly complex global economy. This is not someone who responds well to being told by a foreign leader to resign. And this is not a country with any historical tradition of allowing Washington to dictate its domestic political leadership. Canada has been an independent nation since 1867. It has fought alongside the United States in every major conflict since World War I. It is America's largest trading partner with $718 billion in bilateral trade annually. And now, for the first time in the history of that relationship, an American president has directly demanded that Canada's democratically elected leader step down. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button right now, because this story is about to get significantly more complicated, and you'll want to be here for all of it. Every like tells the algorithm this story matters and helps push this content to more people who deserve to know the truth about what's happening to the international order right now. Here's what happened at 1:47 p.m. Eastern Time inside the State Department. Canada's foreign minister, accompanied by the Canadian ambassador to the United States, sat across from the Secretary of State in a meeting that lasted 1 hour and 23 minutes. According to someone who was briefed on the meeting within 2 hours of its conclusion, the Canadian Foreign Minister opened by stating that Canada categorically rejects any suggestion that its Prime Minister should resign based on the demands of a foreign government. The Foreign Minister then delivered what sources describe as the most pointed diplomatic message Canada has ever sent to the United States in peacetime. The message, according to my source, contained 3 elements. First, Canada considers Trump's demand for Carney's resignation to be an unprecedented violation of Canadian sovereignty and an interference in Canada's democratic processes. Second, Canada will not adjust its economic policies based on threats or ultimatums from any foreign power, including the United States. Third, if the United States proceeds with any economic retaliation targeting Canada based on its refusal to comply with this demand, Canada will respond with immediate countermeasures and will raise the matter at the United Nations, the G7, NATO, and every international forum where questions about American respect for Allied sovereignty can be litigated publicly. The Secretary of State, according to my source, appeared visibly uncomfortable throughout the meeting, stating at one point that the President's statements do not necessarily reflect official EU policy and that diplomatic channels remain open for resolving any economic disagreements. But here's what concerns me most. The Canadian Foreign Minister reportedly responded by saying that Trump's phone call this morning was not a diplomatic disagreement. It was a demand for regime change in a G7 democracy. And Canada's response is that the United States does not get to choose Canada's government. Subscribe now if you want to follow where this crisis leads, because the implications are staggering, and mainstream media will be 3 hours behind everything I'm showing you. But wait, there's something even worse I haven't told you yet. At 3:34 p.m., less than 2 hours after the State Department meeting concluded, Prime Minister Carney held an emergency press conference in Ottawa that was broadcast live across Canada and streamed internationally. Standing at a podium in the House of Commons, Carney delivered a 7-minute statement that Canadian political observers are already calling the most forceful assertion of Canadian independence from American influence in modern history. Carney began by confirming that he had received a phone call from President Trump this morning, in which the president suggested that Carney should consider resigning. Carney then stated, and I want you to hear his exact words because they represent a watershed moment. Canada is a sovereign nation. Our government is chosen by Canadian voters in free and fair elections. No foreign leader, regardless of the power they wield, has the authority to demand the resignation of Canada's Prime Minister. I was elected by the Canadian people 47 days ago with a clear mandate to pursue economic policies that serve Canadian interests. I intend to fulfill that mandate. Canada's monetary policy will continue to be set independently based on Canadian economic conditions. We will not subordinate our economic sovereignty to threats or ultimatums from any quarter. The room erupted in applause from Canadian MPs across party lines. Conservative Party leaders, who normally oppose Carney's Liberal government on virtually every policy question, issued statements within the hour, expressing full support for Carney's defence of Canadian sovereignty. The leader of the Conservative opposition stated, "We disagree with Prime Minister Carney on many issues, but on this question there is no disagreement among Canadians. Our Prime Minister is chosen by us, not by Washington, and it gets worse." At 4:52 p.m., the European Union issued a statement through its High Representative for Foreign Affairs, expressing concern about reports of American interference in the democratic processes of allied nations and reaffirming the EU's commitment to the principle that democratic governments are accountable to their own citizens, not to foreign powers. At 5:18 p.m., the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary issued a carefully worded statement emphasizing the importance of respecting the sovereignty and democratic processes of all nations within rules-based international order. What you are witnessing is America's closest allies, in real time, publicly rejecting the premise that the United States has the authority to demand leadership changes in democratic countries. This is not a minor diplomatic dust-up. This is the infrastructure of the post-war alliance system beginning to fracture over a fundamental question. Does American power operate within any constraints, or has it become untethered from the norms, institutions, and mutual respect that have governed the democratic world for 78 years? Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because this story is far from finished. When Canada announces its countermeasures, when the G7 holds its emergency session, when NATO allies begin questioning American leadership, you will see detailed analysis here immediately. Former US Ambassador to Canada David Cohen, who served under 3 different administrations, told CNN this afternoon something that should make everyone pay attention. He said, and I quote, "In 40 years of studying US-Canada relations, I have never seen anything remotely resembling an American president demanding that Canada's Prime Minister resign. This crosses every line of diplomatic conduct and allied respect. If this becomes normalized, if American presidents believe they can simply demand that allied leaders step down, the entire framework of democratic cooperation collapses." Constitutional law professor Rebecca Winters from Yale Law School, who specializes in international relations and democratic norms, stated in an interview this evening that Trump's demand represents what she called democratic imperialism, the belief that American preferences override the electoral choices of other democracies. She emphasized that if the United States proceeds with economic retaliation against Canada for refusing to comply with this demand, it would represent the first time in modern history that America has punished an ally for maintaining democratic sovereignty. Here's what I'm watching for in the next 48 hours that will blow this story wide open. First, whether Trump follows through on his threat of economic measures against Canada. Multiple sources indicate that trade advisors are preparing an executive order imposing tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and lumber, potentially totaling $87 billion in affected trade annually. If Trump signs that order, Canada has already prepared a retaliation package targeting American agricultural exports from politically critical states including Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Second, whether other G7 leaders issue public statements either supporting Canada's position or remaining silent. Silence from traditional allies would signal that democratic nations are unwilling to confront American overreach, even when it directly threatens their own sovereignty. Third, whether this crisis affects the upcoming NATO summit, scheduled for next month. Canada is a founding member of NATO and a critical partner in North American defense. If this escalates, Canadian officials may use the NATO summit to raise broader questions about whether an alliance led by a nation that demands regime change in allied democracies can maintain credibility. The next 72 hours will determine whether this becomes a temporary crisis that gets walked back through diplomatic channels, or whether it represents a permanent break in how the United States engage with democratic allies. Let me bring this together because we are running out of time and the clock is ticking faster than most people realize. What happened today is not an isolated incident. It is the logical extension of an approach to American power that recognizes no constraints, respects no norms, and acknowledges no distinction between adversaries and allies. When the President of the United States believes he can call a foreign leader and demand their resignation, and when that foreign leader refuses and the President threatens economic punishment, you are witnessing the collapse of the system that has prevented great power conflict for nearly 8 decades. Let me lay out the 3 scenarios that are now on the table. Scenario 1. Trump backs down. Probability, quints percent. In this outcome, faced with unified opposition from Canada, quiet pressure from European allies, and warnings from his own State Department that this crisis threatens fundamental alliance structures, Trump issues some face-saving statement claiming he was misunderstood or that he was simply offering friendly advice. Carney remains in office, Canada maintains its monetary policy independence, and the crisis passes. But even in this best-case scenario, the damage is done. Every Democratic ally now knows that the American president believes he has the authority to demand their resignation, and that knowledge permanently alters the psychology of the alliance. Scenario 2. Economic warfare. Probability, 45%. Trump proceeds with tariffs targeting Canadian exports. Canada retaliates immediately with its prepared countermeasure package. Trade between the two countries, which supports millions of jobs on both sides of the border, contracts sharply. American manufacturers who depend on Canadian inputs face supply chain disruptions. Canadian consumers face higher prices on American goods. The economic pain is distributed across both countries, but the political pain is concentrated on Trump, who now owns a trade war with America's closest ally and largest trading partner. Republican senators from border states begin receiving calls from business leaders demanding the crisis be resolved. This scenario likely ends with grudging de-escalation after both sides inflict economic damage, but with US-Canada relations fundamentally poisoned for years. Scenario 3. Alliance fracture. Probability, 40%. This is the outcome that should genuinely terrify anyone who understands how the post-war order functions. Canada does not back down. Trump does not back down. Economic measures are imposed. Canada raises the issue at the United Nations, citing Article 2 of the UN Charter on Sovereign Equality of Nations. European allies, already frustrated with American unpredictability, begin publicly questioning whether alliances with the United States provide security or volatility. The G7 summit becomes consumed by this crisis, rather than addressing China, Russia, or global economic coordination. NATO members begin asking whether an organization led by a nation that threatens allies over economic policy disputes can credibly defend collective security. The fracture is not dramatic or immediate, but incremental and irreversible. American leadership of the democratic world erodes not through military defeat, but through moral delegitimization. But here's why this matters beyond this one case. The stakes go far beyond whether Mark Carney remains Canada's Prime Minister or whether tariffs get imposed on Canadian lumber. This is about whether democratic nations remain sovereign or whether American power has become so untethered that the President of the United States believes foreign elections, foreign governments, and foreign leaders exist at his pleasure. If Trump can demand that Canada's Prime Minister resign and threaten economic destruction if Canada refuses, what prevents him from making similar demands of Mexico, of European allies, of any democracy whose policies he dislikes? And if those demands become normalized, if the pattern gets established that American presidents can simply call allied leaders and order them to step down, then democracy itself becomes subordinated to American imperial preference. So what can you actually do about this? Because I know a lot of you are watching this feeling powerless. First, contact your senators and representatives, especially if you live in a border state or a state with significant trade relationships with Canada. Tell them that threatening allies over democratic sovereignty is unacceptable and that Congress has the constitutional authority to constrain executive overreach in foreign policy. Second, share this video. Most Americans have no idea this crisis is unfolding because mainstream media is 3 hours behind, and when they do cover it, they treat it as a typical Trump controversy rather than a fundamental threat to allied democracy. Third, pay attention to how other democratic leaders respond. If European allies stay silent, if they prioritize their own relationships with Washington over defending the principle that democracies choose their own leaders, that tells you everything you need to know about the future of the Democratic Alliance. Subscribe to this channel right now, because in the next 72 hours, everything could change, and I will be the first to bring you the breakdown before the spin machine has a chance to bury the truth. What happens next will determine whether the international order survives this presidency, or whether we are witnessing its real-time disintegration. The next 72 hours are critical. This is history unfolding in real time. The stakes have never been higher, the implications have never been clearer, and the outcome has never been more uncertain. Drop a comment below. Do you think Canada holds firm, or does economic pressure force a compromise? Which scenario do you think is most likely? I read every comment, and I want to hear what you're seeing in your communities. Are people paying attention to this, or is everyone missing the significance? What did I miss? What angle am I not considering? This is the moment when we find out if sovereignty still means anything in the democratic world.